He was a convicted con artist who somehow was able to convince the FBI to set him free. They thought they were using him, but really, he was using them. Because whilst working as an informant for the federal government, Scott Lee Kimball was quietly killing women, a teenage girl, even his own uncle, all whilst cashing government checks and feeding the agents lies. But by the time they realised who he truly was, around 6 people were already gone, 4 confirmed. And one of the FBI's own informants, they had become a serial killer hiding in plain sight. This is a story of how the system helped create a monster. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. If you're new here, I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another true crime and makeup episode. Oh yeah. As you can tell from the title, the intro, and possibly the thumbnail, today we are covering a crazy ass case. The case of Scott Lee Kimball, an FBI informant who was rogue all along. Now before we dive in, if you are new here, my name is Anna. I am a certified yapper. I could yap for the entirety of Scotland. And honestly, I could yap about true crime all day, every day. But instead of yapping all day, every day, I hop on here twice a week, every single week on a Wednesday and Sunday, and we sit down and talk about a new true crime case. So, if true crime is your jam, I highly suggest you subscribe, get the notification bell on because, well, like I said, I'm here for you twice a week, every single week, and it's free. If you do enjoy my content, please don't forget to engage with this video in some way. A like, a comment, a share, it goes such a long way. But please, above all, if you can hype this video, I would be so freaking grateful. We just hit 31k. And that's because of you. Without you, I would not be at this milestone that feels so huge to me. And I'm just so freaking grateful for every single one of you who likes, comments, subscribes, watches the content, hypes up the video. It honestly means the world to me. And my heart honestly just feels so full at the community that we've built on here. It is such a positive space, full of love, full of support, and that's exactly what we need in the true crime community. Any details you need regarding me, myself and I, they're all listed down below. You know the drill, but without any further rambling and any further ado, let's get into the horrifying case of Scott Lee Kimball. This hairstyle looked cuter in my mind, but on camera, it's not translating at all. I thought it was going to look cute. I look like Legolas. Is that his name? Legolas? Legless? Leglass? I don't know. Insert photo. Why are we twins? Long lost brother. Also, just another little FYI, my hands and my nails, let's not talk about them. I've been painting and decorating this house all freaking week. I'm exhausted, and honestly right now I could be doing my nap. I really could. But hi. Welcome back. Let's get into the case. So, Scott Lee Kimball, he was born on September the 21st of 1966. He was born in Boulder, Colorado to his parents, Virgil and Barbara Kimball. He also had a younger brother by the name of Brett, but Brett was a few years younger than him. In the beginning, to outsiders looking in, this seemed to be a very normal, very ordinary, middle-class Colorado family. Now, Boulder in the late 60s and early 70s, it was this college town blend of mountain life and also suburban camp. It was a kind of place known where children could be out riding their bikes until sunset and you wouldn't have to worry about them. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone. People looked out for each other, and that was the exact world that Scott Lee Kimball was born into. But unfortunately, as it tends to go in these tales, this is the kind of world that he was born into, but not the kind of world that would remain. When it comes to his parents, Virg and Barb, let's just say they're opposites. You've got Virgil, he's very steady, he's very stern, quite old school in how he wants his children to behave and act, and also within his methods of punishment, shall we say. Virgil was also known to be a really hard-working guy, but a lot of people would say that it was too much hard work. Like, Virg, take a day off, hun, put your feet up. But he was all work and absolutely no play. And then you've got Barbara, free-spirited. She's more emotional. She's more in touch with herself. She was really tapped into the whole eat, pray, love sort of thing, which, that's great. But Virgil hated that. Virgil hated that Barbara was more free, more emotional, and that she was showing their children this. And not only this, but Barbara, although she could be hardworking, she didn't want her life to be based around work. And honestly, more power to her, because neither do I. Does anyone? And whilst this could be a good thing, a lot of people did say that Barbara was much more all play and no hard work. Despite this, at first, the couple's marriage seemed to be stable. They seemed to be relatively compatible to start with. But as the years go on, these cracks, they just start to show. It kind of came out of nowhere, but it was very obvious that neither member of that couple were happy anymore. They had changed, they had grown apart, and Barb was hiding quite a big secret. Now, due to the very different ways that Barbara and Virgil wanted to raise the kids and, the ways that they wanted to live, there would be frequent arguments in the Kimball household. And although there was arguments, it wasn't really an abusive household, but it was just so volatile to the point where even the children in the house can feel the tension. But still, despite all of this, Scott's early life, his childhood up until the age of 10, it seemed to be normal. It seemed to be fine. I mean, it wasn't great by any means. Now, when he attended school, teachers had said that he was a really charming young boy. He was intelligent and he had great potential. However, they identified very early on that Scott was also the kind of boy that knew how to manipulate people to get exactly what he wanted. And this is all before the age of 10. But he played sports, he would play with his friends, he would go on fishing trips, he would go hiking. I mean, after all, Boulder is the kind of place where outdoor activities and being at one with nature is completely possible. So even the family, they would take trips, they would go hiking up the mountains, they would go camping, fishing trips, father and son bonding style. Again, it did have the potential to be good if the household wasn't so volatile. And whilst things in the household, there's not any roaring red flags at the moment, or there's definitely a few amber ones waving. Emotionally, it might not be the easiest, but in terms of physically, I think they're in quite a safe environment. Despite this, Scott was always described as being a bit emotionally off, shall we say. He didn't really seem to handle disappointment all that well, and it did seem as though the smallest thing could trigger the biggest reaction from him. If he even felt just the tiniest bit slighted, he would sulk, or he would lash out in a very aggressive manner, one that would terrify those around him. So Scott hits the age of 10, and it's at this point where the childhood, it just takes a nosedive. It's not looking good. Things are going to get really rough and really horrific. But starting off with the very first thing that would reshape everything that he knew about his childhood. His mum Barbara, remember I said Barb was keeping a secret, quite a big one too. Well, Barbara would finally come out as a lesbian. She wanted to be in a female-on-female relationship, which is absolutely fine. But it was the kind of thing that was going to tear their family apart at this point. And not to mention the fact that back in the 1970s in Boulder, Colorado, being a lesbian, being out and proud, it was quite rare and honestly kind of socially explosive. But Barbara was willing to take the risk. She wanted to be happy, she deserved to be happy, and she wanted to be true to herself and show her sons that you should be proud to be true to yourself. And I'm sure you can probably guess this would be the end of Virgil and Barbara's marriage. After all, Virgil's not a woman, and Barb wants to be with a woman, and the pair know they need to divorce. They can't remain together for the children. It's just not going to work. So they get their divorce, and at this point, Scott just feels like his entire world is crumbling beneath his feet. I mean, his mum is very much free-spirited, eat, pray, love, just, at one with nature, great. But he needed the stability from his father. But his father ended up moving away to Montana. He remarries at some point, has himself a nice new wife, a nice new family, and Scott and Brett, they feel left behind. People said that this is when Scott would change. This is when the change was noticeable. He was angry at the world. It was everyone else's fault. And like many people, he starts to rebel. He starts to act out. And it wasn't too long after this divorce that Scott would have his very first run-in with the law. And I mean, honestly, quite a serious one at that. Or at least it feels serious to me. One day, Scott goes up to his bedroom window. He's got a gun in hand. And he just lets loose on the neighbourhood houses, firing shots at neighbours' houses, their windows, their doors. He could have killed someone. So the police are called round, they have a stern talking to him. I'm not entirely sure what else happened, but more should have happened, is all I know. And this is the incident that told people we're not just dealing with a moody child who is sad about his parents' divorce. We're dealing with a child who potentially could be very, very dangerous. Now at this point, Scott and Brett's mother, she's also went off to find herself. I believe she moves to Denver, she gets herself a partner, she's living a happy life. But Scott and Brett, they're shipped off to live with their grandma in her mobile home. And listen, this grandma, she does what she can. She tries to make this place a home, she tries to make it feel as nurturing and as safe as possible. But these boys, it was never home to them. It was never going to feel like home. Both of the boys, they just feel abandoned and they feel betrayed by both of their parents. I mean, why couldn't one of them at least take them in? Why did it have to be that when this divorce happened, everyone had to split up? And at this point, Scott really, really craves attention. He wants all eyes on his and he will do anything he possibly can to get this attention. And a lot of the times it did involve acting out, starting fights, trying to set fires, bullying neighbourhood kids. He was just being a little bit of an asshole. Now, also around this time is when family had noted that they noticed that Scott wasn't emotional. But what he would do is he would perform. He would perform these emotions without actually feeling them. Like he could be crying with a straight face. When he smiled or when he laughed, his eyes didn't change. It was very obvious that he was just going through the motions, going through what he thought was the appropriate emotion for the time. And this is something that would go on to become one of his most dangerous traits. I do need to warn you, what goes on to happen to Scott in his early teenage years, his early adolescence, is absolutely horrific. It is evil, it is vile, and it is something that no one should ever have to suffer through, especially not a child. While Scott and Brett are living with their grandma, they would encounter one of their grandma's neighbours, and this neighbour was Theodore Payton, a monster himself who would take advantage of these young boys in the most horrific way. He's seen that these young boys were more vulnerable. Their parents have just been divorced, they kind of feel abandoned by their parents, have been shipped off to live with grandma, and he finds a perfect opportunity to sink his claws in. He befriends these young boys. He tries to give them a safe space. He's like, I'm your friend, call me Theo. When really they should have been calling him creepy cretin. He pretended that he was someone that these boys could trust, someone that these boys could come to. But once these boys had built up this trust and this relationship with Theodore, the boys would be taken to his cabin. This was in Nederland of Colorado, and both of them would start being abused by this evil monster. At first, this sicko, he was taking photos of these young boys, and you can imagine what kind of photos these are. Then he would make these young boys touch him. Then it wasn't long before he would target Scott individually, making him feel like he was his favourite. And then not too long after that, he is tying up this young boy and raping him on multiple occasions. Not only this sicko, just when you think it can't get any worse, whilst he is raping this young boy, he even videotapes it. He then threatens Scott and tells him, if you ever tell anyone what I did to you, what we've been doing, I know where your father lives and I will hunt him down and I'll murder him. And this abuse, it wasn't a one-off thing. This was something that continued and continued and continued. Even when Scott had moved to Hamilton, Montana to live with his dad and his brother, when he would come home to Boulder at the weekends, Theodore was waiting for him. And Scott Kimball at this point, of course, he feels completely broken. He has no one to confide in. No one knows what he's been through, the extent of the abuse. And he turns to non-violent crimes. This is his escape from this life, from this horrifying reality that he's been living through. Most of the time, the crimes that he would commit would be fraud related. And by the young age of 22, this is when Scott would be convicted of his first felony, and this was to do with passing bad checks. There was also another charge for running an illegal hunting outfitting business. And then once he was back in Colorado, this is when he decides, you know what, I'm just going to burglarise houses then. Maybe I'll just get quick money that way and I'll be less likely to get caught. And listen, nothing excuses crime, okay? Burglarising, fraud, it's all really shit behaviour. But what this young boy had endured at that time, can we really blame him for turning to something destructive? And let me just get it straight here, I am not excusing what he does later, because he does go on to become an evil monster himself. But at the moment, I can feel for what he is going through. The abuse at one point becomes far too much for Scott. He feels ashamed, he feels guilty, he feels like maybe this was all his fault. He becomes a shell, he isolates himself, he becomes depressed. And this is when he decides that he wants to end it all. He does not want to live with the guilt and the shame that he feels right now. And at the age of 23, he takes a gun and he shoots himself in the head. Now this bullet glanced off his skull, he was rushed to hospital, and he would survive this. Don't get me wrong, he was in critical condition for several days. People didn't know if he would pull through, and yet he did. He was getting a second chance at life. Now thankfully, once he was released from hospital, Scott and multiple other young men from Boulder, they all came forward and they went to the police and they told the police what Theodore Payton had been doing to them. Because it wasn't just Scott and Brett, it was so many young men. Thankfully, this evil monster, Theodore Payton, he would be arrested and convicted on 7 counts of sexual assault against children. He would then be imprisoned, far away from these children, not able to hurt them ever again. But just because the monster's been put away doesn't mean that the feelings that the victims harbour are as well. Scott himself, he had actually written a letter to the judge who was doing Payton's trial. He was begging the judge to give him additional time, telling the judge that he didn't deserve to ever be out of prison. And Scott had said, "He has denied me my right to a normal, healthy, innocent childhood. He has damaged my life forever." This young man is literally begging and pleading with the judge, please give him extra time. Please make sure there is no way this man can ever hurt me or any other innocent children ever again. But this letter didn't add to the sentence. Now, a later girlfriend of Scott's, she would say that for the rest of his life, he carried this guilt, this shame with him. He always said that he never felt like a man, that what Theodore had done to him made him feel less than. And it's just absolutely horrible to think that someone would be left feeling this way because of something a horrific abuser done to them. I mean, it truly is just devastating thinking of victims who go through this kind of thing and finding it so difficult to heal and recover from this and be able to live a normal or healthy lifestyle. It's so horrible, the amount of innocent lives that these horrible predators like Theodore Payton ruin. So years and years go by and Scott is just trying to repair his life somewhat, okay? But to be honest, I mean, was he really putting his best foot forward when he's still participating in crime? I know how horrific his childhood has been, but you've really got to channel that into something more positive for yourself. But he was getting the support, he was getting help. He had people who were encouraging him to take a different path, to go down a different route, to make his life better. But Scott really enjoyed crime. But you know, even whilst you're committing crime, you still want a bit of companionship. So Scott, he goes through his first marriage, which, if I'm honest, it's not very highly documented, so I don't have much information other than the fact that it fizzled out like a sparkler in the rain. 1 minute it's there, next minute it's gone. But he decides that he's not done with love, and in 1993 he decides to give matrimony another shot. So he marries a woman by the name of Larissa Hentz. She was a dental assistant, and somehow she thought that Scott Lee Kimball was a bit of a catch. I've seen the photos and I don't know about that, but to each their own, you know, we all have our individual taste. And yeah, I mean, it's confusing because some statements said that he had a defined jawline. Is a defined jawline in the room with us? Because I'm not seeing it. But anyway, the two of them, they hit it off right away and they decide they're going to move to Spokane of Washington to have a fresh start building their life together. But spoiler alert, the only thing about Scott that was fresh was the new lies that he would come up with every single week, if not every single day. And for a hot minute, things actually look a bit normal. Outsider looking in, they've got 2 sons at this point. Life looks happy, it looks regular. Just seemed like the usual small town setup. They attended church on a Sunday, they had backyard barbecues, but behind that white picket fence illusion, Scott was running scams faster than half of us would even run errands. Now, Larissa would even say that process servers, you know, those people who like come to your home, they hand you legal documents and stuff like that, well, they had practically reserved a parking spot outside their house because they were never away from their frickin' door, and this was all Scott's doing. Scott was hustling people left and right, especially in the logging industry. This man was swindling business partners, skipping out on payment, and leaving behind a very angry trail of broke men who wanted their money back. And, you know, possibly to take a baseball bat to one of his kneecaps. But who can blame them? Now, according to Larissa, she had said that any time something went wrong in Scott's life, it didn't matter what it was, he could pee over the toilet seat, get angry about it, and blame it on someone else. Like, you made me pee on the toilet seat. The man never knew the meaning of the word accountability. Always an excuse at hand, and this is just typical con man energy. And let me tell you, when he chose his victims for his scams, they weren't random by any means. These were people that he knew and that he knew well. His bishop, for one, a dentist for another. The man had zero shame in his game. So by 1997, Larissa, she has had enough of this man. And she decides, I need to end this. This marriage, no for me, I want to cash out now. So she goes on to divorce Scott, and you would think, this is the end of it. She'll take the kids, she'll go off, be happy. But no, because Scott doesn't do endings. This relationship would continue to drag on for another 2 years because this man would not leave this woman alone. And it would finally implode when Scott was accused of raping Larissa. That's right, he raped her multiple times. Scott, at this point, he says to people, no, I never raped her. She's just wanting custody of the children and this is her excuse for it. Because in Scott's twisted mind, he was always the misunderstood victim, never the felon. Now, Larissa, she was made to take a polygraph test about this horrific ordeal. And because she failed this polygraph test, prosecutors wouldn't touch it. They dropped the case. They called it complicated, which is basically legal speak for we don't want to get involved in this messy situation. Another reason that they gave for not wanting to get involved was because even after this rape had occurred, Larissa did go on to have sex with Kimball on later occasions. But what's to say that that wasn't forced? What's to say that she wasn't coerced into that, threatened into that? But these people just want to turn a blind eye. So then we come to the year 2000, and this is when karma would finally clock in for business against Scott. So Scott, he would violate his parole from a previous conviction because, well, of course he did. He's that kind of guy. Now, because of this yanked away his suspended sentence and he would be sent back to prison in Montana. He was then put into a halfway house where he had to remain. He escapes from this halfway house the very next year because he's not built for following rules. And when he escapes from this halfway house, he doesn't do it quietly. He steals a truck, raids the gas station cash register, the gas station which, by the way, he worked at for his work release job. And then he hit the road, like the man we know that is allergic to accountability. So after this little road trip, crime spree, hybrid situation, he would then return back to Spokane. Because why not return to the place that you committed the very worst crimes. And this is when things start to turn even darker with this man. According to Larissa, he had broken into her home where she and her children slept, where he would kidnap her and then rape her again. Now Larissa, once she is able to get out of this situation, she immediately goes to the police. She immediately files charges against him. And shockingly, a warrant was actually issued for his arrest. And this is the beginning of this lifelong pattern with this man. The scamming, the pretending, slipping through the cracks, leaving chaos, fear, and a pile of paperwork right behind him. So after his little Spokane encore situation, he decides he wants to go for what we're going to call a geographical cleanse. And this is when a con man doesn't go to therapy. He just flees the state. So he heads off to Alaska because apparently when you're wanted for kidnapping, fraud and rape, the best thing you can do is flee the state, go somewhere else and pretend to be someone else. So he lands in Alaska and he would do what he does best. And what is that? Oh yeah, lie through his teeth. So he starts going by his brother's name, Brett Kimball, and he gets engaged to another woman whilst using this false name. Because, you know, why ruin just one life when you have the possibility to ruin two? And once he is engaged, he gets right back into his old tricks where he is just committing fraud constantly. The guy doesn't rest. Now this time round, he would write around $25,000 worth of forged checks, which would, shock horror, get him arrested. And now is when the case goes from low-level scammer to you've got to be fricking kidding me. This scam artist, this con man, instead of rotting in a prison cell like he should, he is able to talk and charm his way into becoming an FBI informant. I'm serious. This man convinced federal agents that he could help them take down real criminals. Apparently, in the early 2000s, all you needed to join the FBI was a charming personality, a smooth story, and a pulse. And just like that, the kidnapping charges, the rape charges, forgotten, all out the window. Now the FBI, they claimed that they had nothing to do with this. They apparently didn't wipe any charges. But isn't it just very convenient that when he could be of use to the FBI, the charges that were looming over his head suddenly disappear? Untraceable. So while in prison, he's obviously trying to prove himself to these federal agents. So he had said that a fellow cellmate by the name of Aaron Flowers, he was planning on having a prosecutor, a judge, and a witness murdered. And of course, the Bureau, they love a good conspiracy. So that definitely gets their attention. But to be fair, he wasn't exactly lying, because the FBI, they're able to tap into a call between Flowers and his girlfriend, and they're very much discussing their plan for this murder. And this leads to both of them being arrested in March of 2002, and it kind of shows the federal agents that maybe Scott Kimball is the real deal. This case is later referred to as the Flowers case, and this was known to be Scott Kimball's first big assist. So the FBI at this point, they think they've found a fricking gold mine with this guy, because he's going to rat out any Tom, Dick, Harry, Fran and Sally. Amazing. And Scott Kimball, he thinks that he's got the perfect role in his own movie. The good guy. But this little taste of legitimacy that Scott has, it's not enough. A guy like him doesn't want to be on the straight and narrow. They want to be in control. They want attention. And more than that, they want validation, which is basically the holy trinity of any manipulating psychopath, let's be honest. So he decides he is going to up the ante. He's going to give the FBI even more information. Now, this time he tells the FBI about another inmate who was apparently bragging, saying that he had murdered a federal prosecutor by the name of Thomas Wales. And yet again, this is a pretty big assist from Scott. It really garners their trust, because the Wales case, this had been a complete and utter headache for the Bureau. The first time a federal prosecutor had ever been assassinated in US history. So when Scott drops this bombshell, they don't hesitate, they go in immediately. Now, because of this, they have him moved to a low security federal prison in Englewood. And they do say at this point, it's for his best, for his own safety. You know, this is a federal case. He might be at risk in prison if people know that he ratted on someone. Once there, Scott makes it known to the FBI, listen, I've got intel coming out my ears. Whatever you want, I'll give you it, and what I've not got, I'll get it. Now, he was telling the FBI that he actually had intel about crimes that hadn't happened yet, but crimes that were very much within the planning stages. Now, this would get the attention of an FBI agent by the name of Carol Schlaff. Now, this poor guy, he was basically reassigned to be a prison liaison after working on high-level criminal activity. And honestly, at this point, he's kind of raging because he's practically babysitting these inmates. But when he heard about Scott Kimball and then when he met him, he thought, actually, we might have something here. He really saw the potential. It has suddenly become very, very chilly in this room, and I am wondering, is there a way that I could just get away with wearing my dressing gown for the rest of this video? But I'll not burden you with that because it's not going to be the best look. Anyway, so Scott, he's this guy, he's known to be smooth, charming, and he knew things. Dangerous things. And the Bureau, they're so desperate to get his knowledge, they're so desperate to find out exactly what he knows, so they lean into his facade. They make him feel like he is in control. And Schlaff at this point, I mean, he thinks he's just met the golden snitch of the frickin' underworld. Like, he genuinely believes that he is sitting on a gold mine. This is going to work wonders for his career. But I guess what he didn't really realise is that he's just been cast as a psychopath's sidekick in his origin story. An unwitting sidekick, but a sidekick nonetheless. Because here's the kicker, okay? Do you remember the rape charges, the kidnapping, the fraud, all that jazz that makes Scott a very despicable human being? Well, not only were those charges kind of forgotten about, they just went away into the air. None of it was even on his file. As far as the FBI know at this point, according to them, he's just a very smart, slippery, white-collar criminal. And so they hand him opportunity after opportunity, not realising that they have just unleashed one of America's most prolific modern-day serial killers, all under the guise of being a federal asset. So now we fast forward to 2003, and if things weren't already alarming and chilling enough, this is where things really step up a notch. So Scott Kimball, he was out on a $10,000 bond. He has moved in with his mother Barb and also her partner in Denver. Because I suppose, you know, every career criminal, they need a soft sofa to sleep on and mummy there to do their laundry. And at this point, he is already spinning this respectable businessman persona, flipping houses and dabbling in an organic beef distribution company. And not only that, but cashing $65,000 checks from family. Like, he'd just invented entrepreneurship. Travelling around Colorado, perfect cover. Murder, optional side hustle. Meanwhile, the FBI at this point, they want to keep their shiny new toy happy. The shiny new toy being Scott Kimball. So they provide him with expensive recording equipment. So he's got everything that he needs. He needs all the assets. And he also needs a good payment. So he would receive $50,000. They think they've got someone who is genuinely wanting to help their cause. Whereas Scott Kimball, he just sees them as gullible marks giving him what he wants. And whilst the Bureau believe that he is just helpful in providing crucial intel, he was quietly plotting, scamming, and already stepping in to serial killer territory. So let's talk about the first confirmed victim under his Informant era. Now, very early on, Scott had told Agent Carol Schlaff about a fellow inmate. This inmate was Steve Hawley. And Steve Hawley, he was a convicted bank robber with quite the knack for escapes. Now, Hawley, according to Scott, he's apparently developed this brand new escape plan. He's got it all planned out. So he tells this to the FBI. The FBI notify the prison, and Steve Hawley, he's put in solitary confinement. But here's the frickin' kicker. Steve Hawley never came up with that escape plan. Do you know who did? Yep. Little Scotty boy. It was all his plan. He was orchestrating trucks, diversions, even a ladder over the prison wall. And part of the plan was that Hawley was apparently going to meet up with him in Mexico. But not only this, they dragged in Steve Hawley's girlfriend. This is when we meet Leanne Emery. And Leanne Emery was given one instruction by her boyfriend, and that was to obey and do anything that Scott Kimball requests. And not only that, she should do it without asking any questions. Now, Leanne Emery, she was around 24 to 25 years old at the time where this takes place. She was born in Colorado, and she herself, she had a difficult background. When Leanne was just a teenager, she had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And this was something that she really struggled to come to terms with. She struggled to stick with a treatment plan, and it was something that just seemed to plague her teen years. At this point in time, Leanne is working as a stripper. She's dancing in the club. She's having to earn some more money. And with that, she comes into contact with some shady ass characters. So in late 2002, Kimball, he approaches Leanne, and this is all under the guise of helping Steve Hawley. And whilst he's like, yeah, like, come on Leanne, join me, we'll get Steve out, it's going to be incredible, blah, 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 he also ropes her into multiple other crimes. Theft, check fraud, general fricking chaos, all under the radar of the authorities. Now, Leanne Emery, when she would later describe Scott Kimball and what she knew of Scott Kimball, she had said that he was dangerous, but as long as you don't with him, he's your best friend. And I suppose, I mean, that is Scott Kimball in a nutshell. So on January the 16th of 2003, Leanne Emery, she would leave her parents' home. She tells them that she is going on a cave diving trip in Mexico. So she says goodbye to her parents. She then gives her sister a phone call just to say, you know, I'm going to Mexico, going on a cave trip, not be back for a while, bye, love you lots. But reality check, this young woman, she wasn't going to Mexico. She wasn't going on a caving trip. She and Kimball, they would spend the next several weeks travelling around 4 western states. And they would steal roughly $15,000 in gas, checks. And it was always Leanne's credit card that would cover any bills that were required to be paid. Now, come January the 27th, Leanne, she is in contact with her family, and she lies to them. She says that she's still abroad, she's still having this great time, but is just checking in with them. But the truth of it was that Leanne was actually back in Colorado. She had coloured and cut her hair, she was disguising herself. So she checks into the Grand Junction Hotel, right? And she calls her cousin. And she says that Hannibal, which is Scott's new alias, because of course it is, classic, but if Hannibal found out where she was, she would kill both of them. And she said although she was fearful of him, she felt pretty safe where she was. She felt like she wasn't in any immediate danger, but she just wanted her cousin to know, should anything happen, this is the guy. Now 2 days go by and Leanne Emery, she would check out of that hotel. And it seemed to be the last thing that she would do, because after that, she was gone. Vanished. Kimball would say later on, according to him, his story, he had apparently drove Leanne Emery to Bryson Canyon. This was in Utah's Boot Cliffs, and he had persuaded her to hike into this dead-end canyon. Once she was in there, he then took a gun and shot and killed her on the spot. Now, her abandoned car would be found the next day near Moab, Utah, and this was around 40 miles from the Grand Junction Hotel. Now, Steve Hawley, he's very concerned. He hasn't heard from Leanne, and this is so out of the norm. So he writes to her family and he expresses his concern. But the FBI, when they hear about this, they completely dismiss it. They say, well, you know, she's an adult, she can make her own choices, and she has a checkered past. What checkered past? Because she's bipolar, because she's a stripper, that's apparently her checkered past to them? Get a fricking grip and do your fricking job. Leanne Emery's remains, they would only go on to be discovered in 2009 in a remote area near the Colorado-Utah border. Right, ignore the fact that I do have my arms in my dressing gown, so if you see me blend, you'll see my dressing gown. But honestly, it's just so very cold, I need some kind of warmth. So around the same time that all of this is going on, Scott wasn't just sitting and waiting. He was actually planning another disappearance of a young woman. This time, it was Jennifer Markham. So Scott, he goes to Carol Schlaff and he says, listen, I know about this inmate. His name is Steve Ennis, and I know for a fine fact that he is going to murder a witness when he gets out of prison. Now, 25-year-old Jennifer Markham, where she comes into this, is Steve Ennis, his partner, was her friend. Does that make sense? Steve Ennis has a partner, and his partner is friends with Jennifer. And this makes Jennifer the perfect pawn in Scott's sick and twisted game. Now, at the time, Jennifer, she was also working as a stripper. So she's dancing in clubs. And at this moment in time, she is living with her young son's father. Now, she's spoken to Scott Kimball about wanting to better her life. She wants to make a better life for herself and her son. And he starts telling her about his business venture and how he's got coffee shops all throughout Seattle, and that if she was willing to relocate, he would take her on, pay her a good wage. And Jennifer is so desperate for a better life, a better way of living, that she takes this opportunity from Kimball. An opportunity that didn't exist. Relocating her right into his orbit. Now, what is weird here is that Carol Schlaff, he was very much aware of the Jennifer Markham situation, because apparently Scott had went to Schlaff and was like, listen, can I like Jennifer Markham? Can I sleep with her? Schlaff had told him, absolutely not. Strictly no. Firm no. Stay away from her. Keep your pants on. But Jennifer trusted Scott, and Scott didn't give a tiny rat's ass what Schlaff was actually saying. Jennifer prepares her belongings, packs them up, then moves them into Scott's home in preparation for this move. And then, as you can probably imagine, silence. No one would hear from Jennifer again. Now, I will say her green 1996 Saturn, parking records do show that this was parked at the Denver International Airport on February the 18th of 2003. And then by the end of March, it's been towed away, unclaimed. There was no calls from Jennifer, there was no sightings of Jennifer, she was gone. 2 months later, Scott Kimball, he goes to Schlaff and he's like, listen, I've heard something through the grapevine. I've heard that Jennifer Markham is dead. And Schlaff's like, what? Like, how the hell is that? Like, how have you heard that, first of all? Who told you? Who done it? And like, what do you mean? So Scott, he says that Steve Ennis has an associate by the name of Jason Price. And apparently this Jason Price had shown him photos of Jennifer Markham bound and gagged. This Jason Price had also apparently said that her body had been moved around 150 miles to Rifle and was dumped in a creek. Apparently Price had asked that her breast implants be taken out of her body and also her IUD to try and prevent her from being able to be identified. The DEA, they did actually suspect Scott Kimball himself. And to be honest, so did anyone that was paying attention to what was going on around them. But Scott Kimball, this complete psychopath, he is able to pass a polygraph test regarding the death of Jennifer Markham. And whilst others still weren't convinced, the FBI, they're so desperate for more stories, more intel, they just lean in to this fabricated story that he's made up. So Scott, he keeps spinning this web of lies, right? He thinks he's just going to get away with anything and everything because, let's be honest, he has so far. And in January of 2003, Scott would meet a woman by the name of Laurie McLeod. Now, they had met at a poker table in Black Hawk of Colorado. She was quite charmed by Scott because he had actually come in with his mother. She had come in with him in a wheelchair. She had multiple sclerosis, and she thought that the way that he cared for his mother was admirable. It was lovely to see. And she also loved his confidence. Now, they get to talking and, Scott wants to paint the picture that he's hot. So he tells Laurie that he is an FBI agent. And he's even there flashing a fake badge, like, oh, look at me, I'm in the FBI. And conveniently, whilst he is talking to Laurie, he drops in a name. And he says that he is currently working on a high-profile murder case of a woman by the name of Jennifer, the very same woman that he murdered. Laurie was so endeared by this man that by Valentine's Day, they were already going on their first date. Then we come to Laurie's daughter, Casey. She was a 19-year-old. She was going through a very rough patch in life. She was getting in trouble. She had run away multiple times. She was done with credit card fraud. She was recovering from a meth addiction. But she was doing everything she could to better her life at this point. She's turning things around, but Scott sees an opportunity there. She's vulnerable, and he knows this. In August, he would tell Laurie that he was away on a hunting trip, and it just so happens the same time this hunting trip took place would be the same time that 19-year-old Casey would disappear. Police had refused to take a missing person report, saying that Casey was an adult. She's ran away before, this is probably another case of that. Laurie knew that this wasn't right. Her daughter was doing good, she was turning things around, she was working a job at Subway. But the police wouldn't listen. So Scott returns from his hunting trip. That wasn't a hunting trip, let's be honest. And when he returns, he would console Laurie. He even plants fake evidence, like a gold necklace on the door. He takes one of Casey's makeup kits and, makes it disappear, basically. No like a magician, but just in a way that looks like she's taken it with her. And he suggests that, Casey's still alive. She's just ran away, she just needs space, but she'll be back. Months later, Scott proposes to Laurie and he says, listen, we deserve happiness. We should get married. This will help us heal from Casey's disappearance. We'll keep looking for her. We'll find her together. We will be the perfect couple. So they marry in Las Vegas at a little wedding chapel. They then honeymoon in September near Kremling of Colorado, and weirdly enough, coincidentally enough, this is where 19-year-old Casey's body would eventually be found. How sick and you are taking your new wife to the very location that you murdered her frickin' daughter. And remember that Scott was so awful to his other ex-wife, and this was going to be no different for Laurie. She was facing abuse on a daily basis from this monster. It was mostly emotional abuse, but let's be honest, that's just as hard, it's just as severe to get through. And not only that, but he was horrifically cruel to his older son Justin. He had nicknamed Justin Susie, which Justin absolutely hated, and the reason he was being called Susie is because Scott believed he was far too gentle. Now, July of 2004 comes around, right? Let's bear in mind here that Justin, he has a life insurance policy as well. And the beneficiary of this policy, guess who it was? Oh yeah, Scott. Now, July of 2004, there's this digging accident that takes place. Something really horrific. And this very accident would land Justin in a 2-week coma. Now, apparently what had happened is Scott had thrown some kind of metal grate at Justin. This severely wounded him. There was blood everywhere, he was vomiting, and he even started convulsing. Now, they're phoning for help. Well, Laurie's phoning for help, and Scott's kind of flailing around. He's picking Justin up, he puts him in his vehicle, and he just takes off like a bat out of hell. Now, he drives Justin to the hospital himself, and apparently this was so no one could give their account of what had actually taken place. These injuries were so severe, they were life-threatening. And with this, Scott's own mother, Barbara, she gets an eerie feeling about something sinister that might be going on. She believes that her son tried to kill his son for the life insurance money. So what she does, she would change the sole beneficiary on this policy to her, to hopefully deter her son from wanting to murder his own frickin' son, instead of just grassing him into the police. Honestly. Then we come to Scott's uncle, Terry Kimball. Now this was his father, Virgil's brother. He soon disappears after a family visit. People start asking questions. Where the hell did Uncle Terry go? Where is he taken off to? Not heard from him, tried to phone him, no answer, straight to voicemail. Scott tells the family, "Oh, didn't Uncle Terry tell you? You must have just told me. Uncle Terry won the lottery and he's moved to Mexico." But bank records, they would tell a very, very different story. $23,000 worth of bad checks and 21 head of cattle purchased in Terry's name. Now the FBI, they would be notified of this, but they took very little action. But a year later after Terry had disappeared, Terry's brother Virgil, Scott's father, he receives like this email. And the email address ID is Terry Kimball. So this email, he's like, oh, it's from my brother, says Terry Kimball, must be him because who would lie? Frickin' son would lie, but that's besides the point. But this email from Terry basically states, I'm in Mexico, I'm living my life, I'm having the best time ever. It's very unlikely that I'm going to return, bro. And after that, there was no further contact with Terry, a man who was once so deeply involved with his family. And his body would be found in 2009 at Vail Pass. Clearly not in Mexico. And not only that, but when his body was found, he was mummified. So then we come to late 2005 and Scott's marriage to Laurie. This is just completely unravelling. At his own hands, of course. He was absent a lot from the family home, and allegedly he was juggling multiple girlfriends. As the little guy says in Friends, monogamy is just too cruel to rule. He was as manipulative as ever, and very suddenly, he seemed very disinterested about where Casey might be. He no longer wants to help solve her case. Now, not only this, but Scott is doing everything he possibly can to ruin Laurie's life, just as he's done with every other partner before her. He calls the police twice on Laurie and tries to frame her for domestic violence. And it turns out the reason he was doing this was so Laurie had no authority to be in the house, and then he could move back in and move in his little girlfriend from California. Frickin' cheek, the audacity of this man. Now, by the fall, he had moved to Lafayette, and he was able to persuade his girlfriend to buy a gun for him because he wasn't allowed to buy weapons, but she would do it for him. Anything for love. Now, he tells her, if you get this gun, I'll teach you how to hunt with a rifle. It'll be fun. It'll be cool. Go on, buy the gun. But once she gave him this gun, she would never ever see it again, because this gun wasn't for hunting wildlife. It was for hunting people. So, by January of 2006, Scott can't really hide anymore. Financial investigations that would expose a multitude of sins. So we've got check fraud, stolen bank statements, forged signatures, all of these tied to Kimball. Now, there was an optometrist in Lafayette, and he became very concerned with his bank statements. And the first reason was because they hadn't arrived. So he goes off to the bank and he asked for the status of his money market bank account. And it was there that he would learn that there had been a lot more activity on this bank account than he was even aware of. In the preceding 3 weeks, $83,000 had been deposited in this account, and $55,000 had been written in checks. And most of these checks, well, they were going to Scott Kimball's beef company. Now, there would be security camera footage that would actually reveal Scott Kimball at the bank making these deposits. Now, with all of this coming out, a detective goes to speak to Laurie McLeod. They need the intel, they need the scoop on Scott Kimball. So she agrees to come into the police station, and while she's there, Thatcher then asks Laurie, what does Scott do for a living? And she tells them, well, he works for the FBI. And this is when Thatcher realises that Scott Kimball must be impersonating an FBI agent as a way to get away with his scams. Now, Laurie McLeod, she is starting to feel more comfortable in the presence of Detective Thatcher, and she would open up about her daughter's disappearance. She explains when Casey went missing, the fact that Scott was also out of state at the same time, and she told him that she believes that Scott Kimball is responsible for her daughter's disappearance and possibly her murder. Further investigation, this led Thatcher to want to speak to detectives in Louisville of Colorado regarding the incident with Justin. In March, he would then call the FBI himself, and he expressed his concern that Scott Kimball is impersonating an FBI agent. Now, he was connected to Carol Schlaff, and he's explaining everything that he's found, the fraud, this, that, the next thing, all of it. And then apparently Carol Schlaff, he reacts very sarcastic in a very surprised manner that his client would have any involvement with check fraud. But then Thatcher tells Schlaff about what he's learned from Laurie, about the fact that Casey has disappeared very shortly after being seen in the presence of Scott Kimball. Thatcher and Schlaff, they continue talking, and both of them come to the realisation that perhaps this man isn't just a con artist. Perhaps it's a serial killer. So, from Laurie McLeod, Detective Grusing and Detective Thatcher, they would get Scott Kimball's phone number. And with this, they would do a trace, and this would take them to a neighbourhood in Riverside of California. And surprise, surprise, this is where he had been living with the girlfriend that Laurie McLeod had said he wanted to move into their house. So, March 14th, 2006, he tries to pull an O.J. Simpson, right? Hops in his truck. He flees from the federal marshals, leading them on a 260-mile car chase before eventually surrendering, but not before making a phone call to them and saying, I'm going to kill myself. If you come near me, I'm going to kill myself. Now, he did return to Colorado and Montana to serve some time for crime there. He would plead guilty to illegal gun possession, and Larissa Hentz, she was able to renew her rape allegations. Remember the wife at the very start who went through hell with this monster, her allegations were back in full standing. Now, investigators, when they're going through this weirdo, cretin, loser, sadistic freak murderer's house, they realise that he has an obsession with rape pornography. There was also other hints that had alerted them that he had tampered with body parts. They also found a tangled web of digital footprint, physical traces, and eyewitness accounts that would leave very little room for doubt. Not only this, but investigators, they continue looking, and eventually they recover 19-year-old Casey's Subway uniform. Remember, she worked at Subway? Well, they find her personal items in the possession of Scott Kimball. They also find receipts, a diary, Leanne Emery's laptop, and of course, forged check records, linking him directly to their disappearances. There was tyre tracks, surveillance footage, and GPS data that placed him at the dump sites of the bodies at the very time they were suspected to be dumped. Even his manipulation of the FBI agents, this all became part of the case. Prosecutors would demonstrate how he used his informant status to travel freely and commit murder, and this made the conviction airtight. By April of 2007, Scott Lee Kimball, he had finally confessed to at least 4 murders. Leanne Emery, Jennifer Markham, Casey McLeod, and his very own uncle, Terry Kimball. Now, the only reason he confessed is because he was offered a plea deal. Obviously, this is all they ever do. And this plea deal meant that if he pled guilty, he would avoid the death penalty. And like all these other freaks, this murderer was scared of death himself. In a very chilling, casual fashion, Scott Lee Kimball, he would lead detectives to the bury sites of his victims. He shows them where Leanne Emery's body is, where his uncle Terry's body is, and he even provided very detailed, chilling, horrific accounts of how their deaths occurred. From the manipulation to the luring to the final act, he spilled it all. Now, he claimed that Jennifer Markham, her body was hid somewhere and he just couldn't remember, so he can't take them there, but no biggie, because at least he's admitted to the killing. That was that man's attitude. No biggie, let's not worry about getting her body back to her family, getting her a decent burial, getting her the justice and closure that she and her family deserve. He had also admitted that he did use his status within the FBI to facilitate the murders, portraying them as opportunities rather than crimes themselves. And his confessions, like, he was so freaking arrogant. He was basically bragging. He had so much bravado about him, as if he was telling this great adventure story he was involved in. He was also very calculated and very coldly detached from what he had done. This gave law enforcement a very eerie insight into how he had compartmentalised these killings. By 2010, Scott Lee Kimball, he would be sentenced to several consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Even in prison, this frickin' loser, he is still trying to manipulate narratives. He is offering further confessions within letters, offering shifting motives from biker gangs to revenge, anything to try and paint a different picture than what actually frickin' exists. Now, he would face additional charges in 2017, and this was for facilitating a helicopter escape from the prison, and also the murder of a former associate, as they say. Tigers can't change their stripes, leopards can't change their spots. And in 2020, he would plead guilty to attempted escape, and he was moved into a maximum security prison with a 20-hour lockdown. So there's 4 hours a day where he might be in and out of his cell, but for 20 hours, he is in that little tiny cold cell. And believe me, I hope this monster rots in hell. But my loves, that is it for another true crime and makeup episode. I really, really, really hope you found this one interesting. Maybe, possibly, potentially, it was a new case to some of you. If it was, please let me know down below. If you've watched the video this far, don't forget to leave... What should we leave? Leave a cat emoji. Any cat. I mean, I've got black cats, so if you want to leave black cat, but any cat emoji. And I'll know you've watched this far. Before you go, please don't forget to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, get the notification bell on, and if you can, please, please, please hype up this video. We've just hit 31k. 31 freaking K. Like, I can't think about it too much because I get emotional because I'm like, oh, I can't believe this is happening. But this is all because of you. If you weren't here every single week watching my video, engaging with my content, I would never ever be in this position. And I know I've got a long way to go, but to get to here is, I'm not going to get emotional, but it's just for a long time felt like a milestone that I could never ever reach. So to be at 31k is just insane, and long may it continue. And I promise, if I get to do this full time one day, which I'm manifesting it, I will provide you with the best, most consistent content I possibly can. Don't forget that any details you need, they can all be found down below. That's my social media handles. Please give me a follow over on Instagram. I'm going to be back there this month. The autumn winter is my time to shine, and I just want to share bits of my life with you. Like, I feel like it'd be nice outside of true crime, just to show you what I get up to day to day. If you want any details of products used on my face, they will all be linked down below for you in case there's anything you want to pick up, or if you just want to have a little gander at them. But that is it for today. Please, please, please remember, be a good person. Do not be a bad person. Stay safe. Look after each other. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.